I'm Jo Mortland, and this video is going to be about making good-looking scrap blocks. A scrap block is just that. It's a block for a quilt that's made out of small pieces of fabric. And I make thousands of these things. So what I would like to impart today is sort of my aesthetic tips on how to make scrap blocks look good. When I want to make scrap blocks, I do just that. I go to my scrap basket and I get a lot of random pieces of fabric and I just start sewing them together in any combinations at all. Doesn't matter to me what the colors are or anything else. And then I make, when I have the finished scrap blocks, sometimes I can get about 200 of these out of my scrap basket, believe it or not. Then I put them into quilts to be donated. Here's an example of one, and you can see here that the scrap blocks, each one is different, which is something that I like very much about it. And I feel good about it because it uses up a lot of my extra fabric and makes it into something useful. So a lot of times this is what I do, these random scrap blocks. However, lately, I've been making some quilts where the scrap blocks have a theme. Here's an example of one. The theme here is blue and green, so that all of the strips in these blocks are blues and greens, all from my stash. So this one has a theme to it, and that again is something I like. They're still scrappy, they're still kind of random blocks, but they're organized a little bit better, and that's just something that I particularly like. So since I have made so many scrap blocks, I've learned a couple of things about making them look more interesting, in my opinion. I am going to assume for the sake of this video that you already know how to use a sewing machine, that you already know how to use a rotary cutter, and that you already know how to use an iron. So let's get started. So I'm a person who likes a lot of variety in things. When I'm making my scrap blocks, I keep that in mind. So for example, I might cut the strips at different widths. Some of them I'll cut at 3 inches, some at 2.5, some at 1.5. I generally don't go below 1.5 inches because by the time you finish it, you've got such a tiny little strip. If you're going to make bigger scrap blocks, you're going to probably want to use wider strips than that. So in terms of making them look interesting, I would like a variety of colors. I like to have some lights. I like to have some darks. I like to put prints with solids. I like to put a large scale print with a small scale print. So those are all things that you can do to make them look more interesting. I also like to have some diagonal lines. The blocks that I showed you before are all straight lines, which is fine. You can make a whole scrap block quilt just like this, and I'll show you later how to lay those out so that they look more interesting. But I think that diagonal lines provide some visual interest. Diagonal lines have some movement and they're a little bit different. So I'm going to show you a couple of ways to get diagonal lines in your scrap blocks, either like this or like this, where it's built right in. So we're going to do some of that. So for cutting these blocks, once I have sewed strips together for cutting them, I'm going to use a square up ruler. This particular one is 12.5 inches square, but you can get them at different sizes at a fabric store. And for the sake of this video, I'm going to be cutting blocks at 5.5 inches square. So I've put painter's tape on this ruler at the 5.5 inch mark, so that each time I need to see whether I have enough fabric to make a block, it's real easy to just set this down on top of the fabric and see exactly where I need to cut. So here I am, I'm going to start making scrap blocks. Here are my piles of fabric that I'm going to choose from in the different widths, different colors, different prints, well not different colors, but different variations of the blues and greens, different widths. Here are 3 strips that I have sewed together already, and I want to know whether they're going to be big enough to make a 5.5 inch block. Very easily, I take out my square up ruler and put it on top. No, it isn't big enough. So I'm going to sew one more strip on, and I think I need a light colored strip since some of this is mediums to darks. I am working with a 1/4 inch seam although it doesn't really matter because you're going to be squaring everything up and trimming off the edges anyway. So I'm just going to sew these two pieces together. By the way, for your strips, you want them to have straight edges. When I pull them out of my scrap basket, if anything is raggedy, I take a ruler and my cutter and I straighten out the edges because you want your edges to fit together smoothly. So when I'm doing my scrap blocks, here they are all sewn together, I like to press all of the seams going the same way. Press it on the back. This is with a dry iron, no steam. And I also like to press it in the front, just in case any little, pleat has developed here. So here I am. I've got my mat, and I've got my rotary cutter, and I have my square-up ruler with the 5.5-inch block marked out. And I have plenty of room now to make a block out of this. So let me show you how to use the square-up ruler. I'm going to figure out how I want my block to look. You've got this window so you can decide for yourself. Hold it down, then I'm going to make a cut on my right and a cut across the top. And now this corner that I just made that's in the upper right, I'm going to turn this around and put that corner in the lower left and line up my ruler once more with the tape. Make one more cut on the right, make one more cut across the top. And there I have a perfect 5.5-inch square scrap block. Now, one of my little tips for making scrap blocks a little more interesting is to have some diagonal lines in each block. So here's another group of strips of fabric that I have sewn together, only I'm not going to cut them out straight like this. I'm going to cut them on a diagonal. So here again I've got my window, and I figure out how to place it, make sure that there's enough fabric around all the edges so this is going to work out okay. I'm going to make a cut on my right. Now I'm right-handed. You'd need to reverse this for a left-handed person. Cut on my right, cut across the top. Take this corner from the upper right, put it in the lower left, line up the ruler again, make another cut on your right, another cut across the top. And now I have a block that's got diagonal lines in it, which is one thing that I like, so that if I were going to line these two blocks up, I would line them up like this. So there's one more thing I would like to show you about getting diagonal lines into a block. Here's a finished block that has a diagonal line built in. So I'm going to show you how to do that. I have two strips of fabric sewn together. I have pressed the seams to the same side. And now, instead of just sewing more strips on like this, I'm going to cut this into some short pieces. And the short pieces are going to have one diagonal line cut into them already. Only one end. Only do a diagonal line on one end. I've tried it doing both ends, and you just get really into a lot of trouble doing that. So here's these two strips. This has a diagonal line, and I'm going to cut this into a small piece. And now I'm going to cut this into another small piece with a diagonal line on this end. Here's where your nice straight cut lines come in. Now I'm going to sew another piece of fabric here and here. I'll be right back. So I have sewed another strip of fabric onto each of the ends, onto the ends of each of these two pieces. And now the important part here is to trim this. I've done my sewing, my pressing, and now I want to trim it because I'm going to be adding more strips onto this side and this side, and I want nice straight edges so that can work. You have to be a little bit careful here, which I wasn't. And from here, now I can put another strip here, let's say, and then I might need to put another strip going this way, and that's not going to be quite big enough. but I would trim it. After I sew those two pieces together, I would trim this. And then sew one more piece onto here like this. And I would trim that. So then you get a block where the diagonal line is already built in. And to me, that just has more visual appeal. So here's this block that's ready to be cut now. You can see that it's big enough. I'm going to cut on the right and on the top. Turn it. Cut again on the right and on the top. And what I have is a block with diagonal lines and some visual interest put in. So the last thing that I think can make your quilt more interesting is the way you line up the blocks when you're ready to sew them together. Here you have one with all the lines going horizontally. In this one, I'm going to put this block this way with a vertical line going against that. Here I've got some that are on a slant, and I might put that one like that. As I said, I'm very into variety. Here's one with lots of pieces of fabric in it. And you'll also need to think about what you put above and below things. So here's one with some diagonal lines, and I'm going to put that like this against the one with the horizontal lines. So those are my tips on making interesting looking scrap blocks. They are to use a variety of colors, a variety of the widths of the strips that you work with, a variety of things like using solids and prints and batiks, a variety of ways of cutting out your final blocks so that not everything is perfectly horizontal or vertical, a way of working with smaller pieces so that you have some more lines within each block, and ways of laying out your scrap block in the final pattern of the way you want to make your quilt. So if you decide to make a scrap block quilt, I'd be very interested in seeing how it turned out. You are welcome to email me and have fun.